When you picture a medieval king, what comes to mind? Probably a noble figure in a grand castle, ruling with honor and a bit of fairy tale chivalry. We think of Camelot, glorious coronations, and storybook weddings. But that's the postcard version. The truth is far darker, way more complex, and infinitely more human. Behind the shimmering tapestries and beneath that heavy gold crown, the most powerful monarchs in history wielded a weapon far more personal and devastating than any army: sex itself. This isn't a story about glorious battles or royal decrees. This is the untold story of how strategic marriages, the claimed right to subjects' bodies, and brutal acts of violence weren't just personal scandals. They were the very tools that shaped the map and bloodlines of Europe. So what was the shocking truth about sex and power in the medieval court? Before we pull back that curtain, if you enjoy exploring the hidden, shocking, and often brutal side of history, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what we uncover next. Section 1. The Royal Marriage Market. First, let's shatter the myth of royal romance. In the medieval world, a royal wedding was almost never about love. It was a cold, hard political calculation. Queens and princesses were the single most valuable asset a kingdom had. Their wombs were instruments of policy, and their marriages were the seal on a treaty, or the spark for a war. Dynasties used these unions to lock in alliances, press claims on foreign thrones, and reward their most powerful supporters. The women themselves were often little more than beautiful pawns in a high-stakes game played by their fathers and husbands. Take the marriage of Henry VI of England to Elizabeth of York. Henry Tudor had just won his crown on the battlefield, but his claim was shaky at best. To unite a kingdom torn apart by the Wars of the Roses, he had to marry Elizabeth, the daughter of the rival House of York. Their marriage wasn't born of passion. It was a political merger designed to end decades of civil war and launch the famous Tudor dynasty. And it worked the other way, too. A strategic marriage could give a king a legal claim to another nation's throne, providing the perfect excuse for an invasion. The king's bedroom wasn't a private space. It was a political stage where the future of nations was decided. Section 2. The king's claim. A monarch's power didn't just extend to his enemies. It touched every single person living under his rule, and nothing symbolized this absolute authority more than his perceived control over their bodies. This brings us to one of the most infamous concepts of the Middle Ages: the droit du seigneur, or the right of the lord. This was the supposed right of a feudal lord or king to sleep with a vassal's bride on her wedding night. Now, was this a real, legally enforced right that was used all the time? Historians are pretty clear: probably not. Most believe it was more myth than reality, or at most a symbolic gesture that could be settled with a cash payment. But the idea of it is what's truly terrifying. The fact that this legend even exists tells you everything you need to know about the medieval mindset. The belief that a ruler's power was so total, it could reach into the most intimate moments of his subjects' lives. The king's own sex life was a public performance of his power. A king with many lovers and even more children was seen as virile, his bloodline strong and secure. But this power had a vicious edge. Look at King John of England, the legendary villain of the Robin Hood stories. According to the chroniclers of his day, he wasn't just treacherous but lecherous, frequently forcing himself on the wives and daughters of his own barons. This wasn't just monstrous behavior, it was a political weapon. By violating the women of a rival family, a king could inflict the ultimate humiliation. A brutal display of dominance meant to break their spirit. For John, this abuse of power backfired spectacularly, creating bitter enemies who eventually forced him to sign the Magna Carta. Section 3. Violence and humiliation. The line between a king's right and outright violence was terrifyingly thin. In the brutal theater of medieval politics, sexual violence was a recognized and horrifying weapon of war. When an enemy city was captured, plunder was considered a soldier's right, and that plunder often included the women of the defeated city. This wasn't just battlefield chaos. It was a deliberate psychological tactic. Gang rape, sexual slavery, and public humiliation were used to terrorize populations, break enemy morale, and assert absolute domination. By violating the women of a conquered people, especially virgins, nuns, or noblewomen, an army sent a clear and brutal message: we've destroyed not just your walls, but the heart of your society. We own your honor and your future. Chroniclers of the Crusades and other wars describe how conquering armies would enslave young women, a practice that implicitly included sexual servitude. For the men who led these armies, these atrocities were sometimes even celebrated as proof of their overwhelming might. It was calculated terror, designed to punish and humiliate the enemy into submission. Section 4. The Power of the Mistress. While the queen was often trapped by rigid ceremony, another woman held a unique and incredibly risky position of power: the royal mistress. In an age of loveless political marriages, kings often looked for companionship and real intimacy outside the official marriage bed. The mistress wasn't just a lover. She was often a confidant, a political advisor, and a secret gatekeeper to the king. Her entire position, of course, depended on the king's affection. One wrong move, and she could be cast aside. But while she held his favor, her influence could be enormous. Courtiers knew that the quickest way to the king's ear was often through his mistress. Her private rooms could become an unofficial second court, where policies were shaped and careers were made or broken. Take Anne Sorel, the first officially recognized royal mistress to a French king, Charles VI. She was famous for her beauty, but it was her intelligence that gave her real influence over the king, who showered her with titles and land. She became so powerful that she made dangerous enemies among the nobility. Then there's Alice Perrers, mistress to King Edward III of England. She started as a lady-in-waiting to the queen, but ended up so wealthy from the king's favor that she became one of the richest women in England. With no official power at all, these women learned to navigate the treacherous currents of the court, wielding a soft power that could change the course of history. Section 5. The hair is everything. But above all else, the marriages, the mistresses, the power plays, one biological obsession ruled the medieval monarchy: the need for a legitimate male heir. A king's body wasn't his own. It belonged to the state, and its primary job was to continue the dynasty. Failing to produce a son was a recipe for disaster, inviting civil war and foreign invasion. And all of that pressure fell directly on the queen. Her fertility was national security. If a queen struggled to get pregnant, the entire kingdom held its breath. They'd try anything. Royal couples were subjected to a bizarre mix of early medicine and pure superstition, fertility rites, religious pilgrimages, strange potions, and special diets, all in the desperate hope of securing the throne's future. The consequences of failing were catastrophic. The most famous example, of course, is Henry VII. His obsession with a male heir led him to break with the entire Catholic Church, divorce Catherine of Aragon, and execute Anne Boleyn. His personal quest completely reshaped English religion, politics, and society forever. A queen's perceived failure in the bedroom could get her publicly shamed, divorced, or worse. It was a constant, brutal reminder that in this world, a woman's worth, and often her survival, was tied directly to her womb. Conclusion. So, from the cold calculations of the marriage bed and the back-channel influence of a mistress, to the public performance of virility and the private terror of sexual violence, sex in the medieval world was never just personal. It was power. It was a tool of diplomacy, a weapon of war, an instrument of humiliation, and the absolute foundation of dynastic survival. Beneath the fairy tales of noble kings and virtuous queens lies a much darker story, a story of how the most intimate parts of human life were twisted into tools of the state, shaping our world in ways we're only just beginning to understand. What part of this dark history shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to keep digging into the brutal truths your history books left out, make sure to subscribe and share this video. We'll see you next time for another journey into the shadows of the past.